Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexandra, aka Twirling Pages, with Tiffany at Read by Tiffany, and we're the co-hosts of Subtle Asian Book Club, and we have our special guest today, which is Monica Kim.
Woo! So this month, our book club pick was Pachinko for the month of November, and Pachinko follows 4 generations of a Korean family in the backdrop of the 1900s. So we go through the Second Sino-Japanese War, essentially, Japan's annexation of Korea, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then also just their families' lives as they live in Japan as Korean immigrants. So that's a basic recap, but just to dive into deeper, because there are a lot of characters to cover, we start off with Hooni and Yangjin, who give birth to Sunja, who has a kid with, I forgot his name, Hansu, and she also ends up marrying, what's his name? Isak. And so they have 2 children, Noah, whose father is Hansu, and Mozazu, whose father is Isak, and then Mozazu ends up having a kid called Solomon. So we have a lot of characters to talk about, but first let's just discuss what we all thought of the book.
Do you want to go first, Tiff? Because you just finished.
Right, okay.
Most recent out of the 3 of us.
I listened to the entire book via audiobook, and I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 5 stars. I think it was different from what I typically read, because for most of our book club picks, they've typically been contemporaries or YA fantasies or adult fantasy for the Poppy War. So this one was definitely really different, but I personally just really enjoyed getting to know all the characters of the family. We talked about it a little bit in the Discord and also on Facebook, but part 3 in particular of the book was a lot less immersive for me. But I think someone brought up in the Discord chat that it was meant to be that way, because that's how family generations are like. You become more distant as you get older. So for me, yeah, right? So I ended up really enjoying the book, gave it 5 stars. It was just super different, but at the same time, I really liked it. There were so many themes explored that we'll get into, but all around, definitely would recommend. And I can see why it's so popular.
Yeah, same. I think I read this last year or 2 years ago, and it was one of my favorites of that year, and rereading it, it is just as good. And it makes me want to reread it again, even though I literally just finished rereading it. I think I also agree with pacing. It was really good the first 2 parts, and the last part it was a little bit rushed, and all of a sudden you see a lot of characters and what's going on. But yeah, someone in the Discord did mention that it is, even though it's not told in first person, it is still essentially Sunja's story. And so as you get older, things start to feel separated and blur. And so yeah, it makes sense. And I do really like the book. It was really, really good.
Sorry, my internet died for a second. But yeah, it's one of my favorite books. For me, I think it was one of the first books that really encapsulated, there's this word in Korean called, that's Han, and it's pretty integral to Korean culture, and it's a description for rage and just sort of this feeling of innate, that this idea that innate to the Korean experience is this inner sort of rage and anger and bitterness. And I feel this book encapsulates that feeling so perfectly, through the story that it tells. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love it so much, because I'd never had that feeling. I'd never felt that reading before and felt that sort of connection. And so yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites for that reason.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of one of the quotes in the book, which is something along the lines of woman, a woman's lot is meant to suffer, or women are meant to suffer. And I feel that line itself is a good sad summary of the book and what you're trying to describe. Yeah.
I thought you were gonna say the intro sentence, which was history has failed us.
Oh,
which I was yeah. That kind of reminds, because I think for me, I didn't know until pretty recently, after reading the Poppy War and everything, that Korea had been annexed by Japan, and that was a whole thing, because you don't learn that in school.
Yeah. that was one of the wild things about reading it, because I think like it was early for me too when I was sort of learning a lot of like Korea's darker history, and like with being like colonized or occupied by Japan, and it was wild. Even like reading through this, it gave me a lot of context even around like the Korea that my mom was born in, even though this book obviously takes place in Japan. Like when they get to the year, she was born in 1949, so when they get to that year, and then I kind of see the state of Korea and Japan at that time, it just like gave me so much more of an understanding of like the world she was born into, and then like subsequently the world that I was born into, that I just like had never had before.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting too. My family's from Taiwan, and Taiwan was also colonized by Japan during the same time period. And I don't know what it was like like obviously through this book, we can see that there's a very negative sentiment from the Koreans because they were colonized. But I think in I think in Taiwan, when I talked to my grandma about it, she was like, this is like one family's experience, but
Yeah.
she was like pretty okay with it because I think she got the opportunity to be educated in Japan, even though when Japan did colonize Taiwan, like we weren't allowed to speak Taiwanese, like you had to learn Japanese. So that's why a lot of older generation Taiwanese people speak Japanese. So it's really interesting to think about like how there's so many parallels like, that happen to like other places too.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I also feel like, yeah, it's really sad that this is something that I didn't know about until reading this book, or like didn't really understand. But I'm thankful that this book exists. So like the diaspora like us, we're able to see ourselves and understand like where our parents are coming from. Because I think in general, like Asian families don't really want to like publicize or like talk about all the hardships they went through. They're like, oh, like I already went through that. Like, why do I have to explain that to you? You're here, you're in America, you're in a better place. Like, you don't have to think about that. But then in a lot of ways, like those things add up, and then they do like affect us in a profound way. So yeah.
Yeah. Like especially like that, there's this whole idea of like we think that someone experiences a trauma once and then that's sort of it, but like it's really generational. And so like your family's trauma, like that is yours also, and it carries on throughout the lineage and like has ripple effects. And so I feel like this book helped me start to see a lot of that.
I feel like that's also a reoccurring theme within this book, how things that happen to like Yangjin affect like Solomon later on. And we talked about this as like one of our Facebook discussion questions, like Hansu specifically as his character. It's interesting to see how like one person can have such an impact on like multiple generations within a family.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah. It's like this singular choice, or I guess maybe like mistake or thing that happened to Sunja when she was younger follows her through all the generations. And also plus like Hansu likes to butt into everything.
Yeah. And then I think of also, I think his name is Yoso, Isak's brother. When he gets that job in Nagasaki, he's just like, okay, like when you make life decisions, you're just like, okay, I got a job, I'm gonna go take that job. But you don't think about how in the effect of this, there was the whole bombing of Nagasaki, and then he becomes like, I think like disabled, he can't like work anymore. He's like pretty much bedridden, that Kyung-yi has to take care of him.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
This book is so much, it's so good, but there's like, what do you even talk about? Because every part of it just explores so many different themes.
I loved the women in this book. I feel like it showed a lot of just like, I feel like in a lot of Asian cultures, like I see it a lot in Korean culture, like women are just like expected to carry this huge amount of like familial burden and really like be the people to like carry their families, and like are the ones who are blamed if your husband fails at something, like it's your fault because you didn't push him enough or whatever. And I feel like this book really shows that, like the amount that the women in this book had to take on, and the burdens they had to take on that was just like expected of them, and yet like the so little power that they were also given was just like so frustrating, but also like relatable. Like I could see that in a lot of like in the women in my own family.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like there was such a duality of like, for example, with Sungja and Kyung-hee, how they had to do so much to take care of the family, but I think Yosef would get upset because he's like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you pawning off this watch? Why are you going to work like that? You make me feel so ashamed. When if she didn't do that, like they would really have no other choice of like how to live.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking about Yosep's like really strong feelings about Kyung-hee working, and it's just like it sucks because I think like I think he's doing that because of like the way he's raised up, and then also like because he does like care for her, but then I don't think he just like he doesn't understand that in sitting like on the side and doing nothing, it's like a lot more painful than if she were to like go out and sell her kimchi like she always wanted to do.
Yeah.
I feel like within this book, it's definitely very prevalent, but even to this day, there's still that like sexism within Asian culture and that expectation of, like the women to care for the families. Like my two of my roommates in college were Korean, and then one of them dated this one guy, and his mom was just like, "You have to take care of my son." And I was like, "Oh my god, no, this is terrible."
Yeah.
I recently read another book called Kim Ji-young, born 1973 or 83, I forget. And it's basically about like modern day sexism, but it was really interesting to like contrast it because like you'll see like in the book the sort of roots of like the what's continued today in Korea, like this expectation again of like the burdens put on women that's just like expected of them. I like it's fascinating to me to see like how things have progressed and also like how they have like stayed so traditional.
Yeah. 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 Someone was saying. But
Yeah.
yeah.
But then also there was that, I think that one scene where like I think every character in this book you would not like them, but you also can like empathize with them, right? Like I did not like Hansu as a character, but I empathize with him. So I can see where he's coming from sometimes. And same thing with Noah. You would, especially as like a diaspora person, you feel kind of conflicted, but you can understand why he's so conflicted. And with Yosef in particular, I think near the end of his life, he was contemplating about how he felt so bad because all their money was going into taking care of him. And I think there was like in the quotes, like he knew it was better if he were like gone from the family, but like what could he do?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, everything's just painful. Yeah, it really sucks. It's kind of like in this situation, it just feels like everyone, the cards that they're all dealt with are just terrible. But
Yeah.
I definitely understand because all of the characters, like, they're all messy, and then you kind of hate them and you kind of don't because you understand them, and you're like, that's exactly how I feel about Hansu because Hansu is like so terrible, but at the same time, he does things like he goes out of his way to like try to take care of Sunja and her family, even though he didn't have to, and even though he could be that awful person, but then it just makes it so much more interesting when he tries to help her, and in some ways, helping her still makes it worse, but like it's still helping her. So
Yeah.
Well, there. Oh, sorry. Were you gonna go?
Oh no, I was just saying. I was just agreeing.
I was thinking of that one scene where Hansu comes back from a funeral to like his limo or something, and then he has like a mistress who's like 18 years old and like very young. She's like, "I want to go shopping,"
oh
and
yeah,
he's like smashes like beats her up because he was like bothered. And I think that kind of starts to show more of his dark side. And I also thought it was really interesting because he had such a life set out for him, but he still cared for like this like not illegitimate, but like his other child that he had with like the other woman.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's very complicated.
I feel like so many of the like the problems that they faced, a lot of it was like, and like it's a good thing because so much of it is like them holding on to like honor and like not wanting to like holding on to this very traditional idea of honor and like refusing to break away from that. Like so many of the refusals or like the things that would make them angry, like with Yosef being angry about them working, or Hansu being angry about not being able to take care of like his child, and even like the refusals of help and stuff like that. Like I feel like that's like so ingrained also in Asian culture, and like this like sort of refusal to like this idea that like needing help is like a horrible thing.
Mhm.
And
There's like
so
so much pride.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that also ties into like the sexism we were talking about earlier about how women have these certain roles and then men also have these certain roles. Like men are supposed to have like it's kind of like saving face, but even in your own family.
Yeah.
Man.
We're getting some comments.
Oh yeah.
Okay. What do we think of Noah's family?
Noah, I had such conflicted feelings on because I think he's an example of like I guess like the Japanese version of like model minority, just like really wanting to not be Korean. And I think every diaspora kid can kind of like understand those feelings to some extent.
Mhm.
But his ending was just really sad for me. Like I was really surprised. I was like, oh, things are going well. Like he's gonna talk to Sunja and Hansu. But I also think like his specific story is different because he has like gangster blood in him. I personally didn't see it as like that taboo of a thing, but I guess like in Korean culture and like Japanese culture, it's like really big. And I was
Yeah.
also really confused. I always thought Yakuza were like a Japanese thing, not a Korean thing.
So it's like basically what you would call like a Korean gangster. And it's like it's still so bad to the point where like if you have tattoos, for example, like you still can't get into certain places because that's like a Yakuza thing. That's like gangsters. Like I have a couple of tattoos and it took like a while for my mom to like be okay with that. And like, yeah, it's such a deep rooted hatred of that like world that I honestly don't know a whole lot about outside of just like sort of those like sort of those like those things that people that I just know that people hate them. And I would love to like read more about that history. I think that's something that I'd be really interested in, about like where exactly that stems from, that like such intense like discrimination and hatred. Because I find it fascinating, especially like the tattoo thing, that's still like pretty prevalent, both in Japan and in Korea.
That's
Yeah.
so interesting because I feel like so many, sorry, like K-pop idols have tattoos and stuff.
Yeah, but it's always like it's like the bad. It's like very much so like a bad boy thing, or like I was surprised like by Jungkook's like hand tattoos and stuff. Like I was surprised that he did that.
It's because he's at that level of fame where he can get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I do remember like having conversations with like friends who are Korean and they live in Korea or they're like immigrants here. And yeah, they said like a lot of times if they want to go somewhere, like let's say like a spa or something, and then you get to see like skin and they see you have a tattoo, then they just like won't let you in. So there's
Yeah.
like a lot of taboo even like now. But I think for him, for Noah in particular, it was like really strong because like one, there is like that kind of context and like that hatred already in the culture. And then two, he was like raised to be so good to the point where it's like too good. Because like you
Yeah.
see him as a child and he's like the perfect
He's
child.
like,
And
I gotta get into university.
yeah, and then like and he just wants to be like his dad, and he just wants to be like a pastor to do good things and like all like XYZ to like be a good person. He's like, "Oh, if I pray to God, if I follow these rules, then everything good will happen to me because like that's the reason why I've suffered so much as a kid having like my dad like beaten up and I see that." And so I think like he was like trying to like justify that to himself and then when he found out that he was like Hansu's kid, it was like well, everything I know is a lie. And
Yeah.
it's extreme version.
Well, Noah had a family, right? Like he had a wife and he had kids. So it was
Yeah,
really like surprising to read about how he chooses to like commit suicide and like leave all that behind.
Yeah.
yeah. I also think, like, he never told his family that he was Korean.
Yeah. Like
Like,
they
that
all
was,
thought
like,
he
a
was
thing that, like,
Japanese.
really like that, like, that signaled that he was really, like, far off because he just like made sure that nobody knew he was Korean. And I think like that kind of like ties into what you were talking about earlier about the model minority. Like he really, really wanted to be Japanese so badly because like he wanted to escape from his past, his history, and his culture. And then like I guess seeing his mom again like triggered everything, was just like goodbye.
Yeah. It's like that realization that he can never actually get away from like being Korean, which he views as like not a good thing. Um, and the shame of like being the son of a yakuza.
Yeah. Also, Noah's girlfriend.
Are we talking? I think we're talking about Solomon's girlfriend from college, right? Wait, no, Noah's girlfriend was that girl.
The horrible girl.
The one who like shows up at Hansu's
yeah.
like lunch. Okay, I thought you were talking about Solomon for a second.
Yeah, like when I first saw that question, I was like, Noah had a girlfriend because I just like remembered him and his family, his
Yeah,
Japanese.
I forgot about her.
She was just like fetishizing him for being Korean.
She was so annoying.
She was truly the worst.
I think she was the ultimate reason why he found out about Hansu, because like she went to their like dinner or whatever, and then after she was like, how come you never told me that your dad was this person? And he was like, what? And then she was like, you can't trick me, you guys look identical. And then he like, nah.
But I feel like part of him probably knew, because it's like, what man would like go through so much to be your benefactor and like put you through college? Like I think part of him knew, but like having that girl really forced him to confront it. And then eventually, like because she was so persistent about it, he had to confront his mom about it.
Yeah. Like I do think eventually all things would have led to that ending. Or maybe not that like extreme. Like I do think like eventually he would have found out, because like that's like such a big secret. Like I don't think it's something that you could keep.
Yeah.
But
I wish we got the chance to know about Hansu's like wife and those families, because there's that scene where Sunja goes and she's like begging to see Hansu, and they're like, Hansu like never shows up here. I don't know what you're talking about. But I think it'd be really interesting to see from their perspective too. Like, did they know she existed? Did they know Hansu had this whole other life?
I'm agree. Did we get the perspective of Hansu's wife? Like for any chapters?
For like a hot second, I think we see like that. I think it's like her son or something who like introduces them, and then Hansu's wife is like, "Oh, just like tell him he's like not here," and then just like show them the door.
Oh, yeah. I think Hansu's wife would have known that he had like other women on the side, but then she's like, well, ultimately he is my husband and he's not going to leave, so I don't really care. He gives me money.
Yeah, she had to have known for sure.
Yeah. Oh wait, hold on. Did you remember this? I did not remember this.
I did not remember that.
Yeah, I don't remember that either.
But that's super interesting to know.
Yeah. Oof. That's rough.
Zan, your energy is like whole Saka to Zuko. That's rough, buddy.
Yes. Oh yeah. Okay.
I feel like there's so many things I want to talk about, because I'm like, part of me wants like, let's talk about like Isaka for a little bit, because I thought that he was such like a great guy, and I felt so bad for him, like being jailed, and then I don't know, like I really liked, like he was such a good. I felt like he was the one character who I felt was like good.
Yeah.
Like I think, like we said earlier, all the characters have their good and their bad and their faults or whatever, but then Isak was like one of the few that are truly like, wow, you're such a good person. And I think that is also true in real life. Like most of the time, everyone has their like problematic parts and their good parts because like we're all human. But then like
Mhm.
rarely you will find a person who is like truly like so pure.
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting because when he goes to jail, it's because he's like praying when he should have been like praying to the emperor and stuff. And I always think it's like because recently we've been reading these types of books, like the whole idea of religion and how it like influences and how it changes throughout like each culture.
Yeah.
Because yeah,
I thought that was really interesting about this book, especially like because it was sort of like, bringing in Christianity, which I just think is like a very complex topic about like missionaries and Christianity and like both in Korea and in Japan. And I feel like this like scratches the surface a little bit and it portrays it in more of a like positive view because it was like their sort of escape away from like following like Japanese law. And it was like also interesting because it was such a big part of another book. I don't know if you guys have read oh, why am I blanking on it? That Korean murder mystery that just came out is the YA one.
is it the one by June Her? I didn't read it, but I know what you're talking about because it was your group pick for Koreathon.
It's very good, highly recommend. But like that is also they also explore that's with Catholicism in Korea during the Joseon era. And so that's one thing that like is another thing that I really want to like learn more about, but I thought was really fascinating in this setting. Just how that was sort of what's word I'm looking for, like how that was so illegal then at that time because it was sort of going against what Japan wanted you to be doing.
Is Christianity like really big in Korea right now? Also, give me. I need to take out my contacts. My eyes are dry.
No,
I'll be back. But keep talking.
I would say I can't really speak for like in Korea. I would say like a little bit, but I would say it's a big part of Korean American culture. It's like especially in like more conservative Korean circles, which my family isn't as a part of really, but I have a lot of friends who are.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I think most of my Korean American friends are pretty active in their Christian community, and I feel like most Korean Americans that I know are Christian. So I
Yeah.
see that more, but then I don't really know anyone who is like living in Korea right now.
Yeah. I think a lot of that is you'll see that a lot with countries where there was some sort of like occupation or like a lot of rebuilding had to happen because then that tends to be where like mission trips and things will go.
Yeah.
Silence of
Conflicted
Silence. Thank you,
feelings.
Rusty.
Yeah. This is the book that we all forgot the title of. I remember the cover. I'm like, I don't know what it's called. Okay. Yeah. But also, Ace was talking about his pride staying faithful to his religion.
Yeah.
That is a very good point.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's so interesting to think about like the persecution of religion because like I think even right now, like in China, you can't like you're not supposed to be practicing, I guess.
I know China. I know China because
Okay.
communism and stuff.
Yeah.
But
Like
but yeah.
this is super random. When I was reading this book, I was thinking of this one instance of like how even like in today, like the whole Imperial Japan thing is a very touchy topic in Korea. And I really like Girls' Generation, right? And then I remember Tiffany got like in a lot of really bad news and like bad drama because she posted like a Snapchat story on like Korean Independence Day of like because I think Girls' Generation was doing like a concert in Japan. So she posted on like social with like the Korean flag or something. And then she got a lot of flack for that. Like people were like, how dare she on this day, blah, blah, blah. And she like basically went on hiatus for like a month or something because of that.
It is a very touchy subject between the two countries still.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to see, like, because especially in K-pop, there's so many, like, K-pop isn't just Korean
Mm-hmm.
musicians, which I feel like is surprising for people who aren't like is in that world. And so it's even interesting, like the dynamic sometimes when a musician will post something and then like just be blacklisted in one country or the other. Uh, like with Tiffany, I remember I think it was J-Hope had something similar happen to him
Really?
like years ago.
Yeah, but it's also because like the Japan that we know now today is very different from Imperial Japan.
It is.
Yeah.
They really sold that kawaii.
Yeah.
Like it's like great that it's so different, but also it's important to acknowledge the wrongs of the past too.
Yeah. I agree.
This is like not a fun fact, but this is like an interesting fact. When we were reading the Poppy War, we were like, Japan did a lot of like human experimentations, major trigger warnings, by the way, for like rough topics. But Japan did a lot of like human experimentations on people. And one of the main reasons why they never got like charged for that in any like criminal courts is because they sold the information to other countries that they found.
Yeah.
Which is like really terrible.
It is. I mean, there's so much that like they just refuse to acknowledge. Like even like in the book, I remember like it kind of discusses a little bit the comfort woman, that whole part of the occupation of Korea, when the girls would like just kind of mysteriously disappear, and like that's something that still like Japan just like refuses to acknowledge is like having happened. But then what I find interesting is, or not interesting, but like horrifying, is that like, so when, you know, so many Asian people have like left various countries and like moved, for example, to America. And like, so like during World War II, you see like the way that Korean Americans treated Japanese Americans, which is horrible. And so there's like all these complex things about like people sort of taking these like long traumas and using it in other places that like don't really have anything to do with those things. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about that recently because I've just been reading a lot and watching a lot of media that like takes place during that time period, and it's just like it's very complex.
Yeah. For sure.
What does IRC stand for?
I think if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Wow. Internet lingo.
I was like, I'm not hip with the kids. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, that makes sense. I remember this like news story about how like in Korea they did contact tracing for COVID because like a church held like something.
I forgot about that.
Mm-hmm.
But what we were talking about earlier about like Japan and imperialism and their like refusal to confront it, it's really wild too, because I don't know if it's just America, but then I know like an American schooling system, like in context of World War II, we don't learn that much about like what Japan did, but we learn so much about what Germany did. And then like if you look at Germany now, like Germany is like confronts like, oh, what we did during World War II was awful. Like we're trying to like not necessarily erase it, but then like live up to, I don't know what are words, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Then, for Japan, it's like they are trying to erase it and they're trying to be like, oh yeah, we didn't do that, even though they don't intentionally say that. So.
I was reading The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang, and the book was talking about how like when you think of Japan during World War II, like the two biggest things you think of are like the bombings and also Pearl Harbor. So then the government really like the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were like absolutely terrible. I know some of my family were actually affected by it because they were like Taiwanese people were in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
But like the Japanese government put a lot of the focus on that. And while it was really terrible, it allowed them to kind of shift away from the terrible things they also did at the same time.
Yeah. Like, I know it's not, I don't want to say it's common, but I know that there are, I actually think this is what J-Hope got in trouble for. But there are people who like, I don't want to say celebrate Hiroshima, but who like there's imagery of it that's really prevalent in Korea because it is seen as the reason why Korea was able to get out from under Japanese occupation. Um, Again, really complex stuff that I don't
Yeah,
really
really complex.
a good handle on myself. But yeah, I think it's like just a lot of horrible stuff.
There was so much the book like talked about briefly, and I wish it dived more into, but I totally understand why it couldn't because it's so big. But I was really wanting to learn more about like the dynamic of like the people who were socialists and ended up in North Korea and what did that, like that one guy who had a crush on Kyung Hee, like she turned him down and then he like jets off to North Korea, and I'm like, so what happens to him? Is he still there? Like probably can't leave.
I do wonder a lot about that.
It's also interesting because it's like for him it was like he was like attending meetings, so he like knew, but like you make those decisions, and like if your family made that decision like a long time ago and you were like generations after are born, like if we had like a Pachinko from that guy's perspective, what would happen to like his family and everyone that's currently living in North Korea? I'm just thinking about this because I recently read In Order to Live.
That was really good.
It was so good. It was very, very sad though.
Yeah, I need to read that, but I'm putting it off because I know it's really, really sad.
It's like I marathoned it in one day because I couldn't put it down. Like I started at like 10 p.m., stayed up until like 4 a.m.
Yikes. Okay. Yeah.
It's wild because so much of the stuff that's like shown in that book, at least like the early parts of that book of like what North Korea was like for her. I remember like telling my mom about it, and she was like, "Yeah, that's just what Korea's like," because that was the Korea that she left. Because at the time when she left, like North Korea, South Korea was like very much so in turmoil still, and she was born basically right when I think North Korea was being formed. So it was wild, just like even talking to her about that, and like even like one person asked like, "Do you think Hansu groomed Sunja?" And there's like stuff even like when I think about just like family members that I have and like the relationships that they had when they were in Korea at that time period, and like today when they tell me about them, I'm like, that is horrible. But at the time it was just like there wasn't really a concept of that idea that should be viewed as like a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's actually a quote from Pachinko. I can't remember it right now, but it was something along the lines of like whatever movement you're in, it just like depends on the context of whoever's in power. So like if whoever's in power sees like socialism as a good thing or capitalism as a good thing, then it's just accepted by the people or just normalized by the people. I'm gonna find this quote.
Well, that's like super interesting because it's so relevant today. I don't know if it's just because I'm reading these books and I'm like gaining more awareness, or if it's just like as a whole, like the culture of like everyone right now is like being more aware of these things. But yeah, it's super interesting to think about.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of like media in general and like fake news or like social media, like where you get your news. It's kind of like a lot of times I think like I was reading an article or something about how like now everyone like everything is like super polar, so you're either on one side or the other. There's not a lot of people who are moderate, and it's mostly because of like algorithms and the way like social media is. So it's like, oh, whatever you see, it's like, hold on, let me find this quote.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I also think it was super interesting how like not in the book specifically, but how quickly movements rise and like gain power. Because I don't think in the book we discuss the North Koreans, like the Korean War in general, or if we do, it's like very, very brief. but I don't remember it, so correct me if I'm wrong. And that wasn't like, this book covers like the 1900s, so like the formation of North Korea and like how South Korea came to be now was pretty recent. Like we're currently like 2020, that's like less than a couple hundred years, like maybe even less than 50 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a completely different world, like just where Korea was 50 years ago to today.
Yeah. This is,
Oh, you found it?
yeah, I posted it.
Ooh.
But yeah, I read this and I was like, oh, this book is so good. But yeah, it is really wild because it's like less than 100 years ago, Japan was like this and Korea was like this, and the world was completely different. And look at us now.
Yeah.
It's so wild too, because it's like this was not that long ago. This was like 1 or 2 generations ago, but we don't know that much about it. Like we genuinely don't until like pretty recently.
Yeah. Thankful for stories like these, so we're able
Yeah.
to understand and experience.
I was watching one of her interviews, like Min Jin Lee's interview, like while I was getting ready for this live. I was like putting on makeup, and she's talking about how like the quote "history has failed us" isn't so much about like historians are like terrible, but more so of like the average person's story. Like you don't know about it.
Yeah.
Like you know, like the big people, right? You know, like I don't know, like Mao Zedong and like whoever the dictator of North Korea is right now. Like you know them, but the average people who get affected, especially by big government's decisions, like you see them as like one-off individual like civilians who might like get killed in a war or something, but they and their families get hugely impacted by their decisions. And that like if it's not documented, if like you're not watching a documentary, you won't know that they exist.
Yeah, kind of like I remember right after you finished it, you were talking about how you were surprised that there isn't much war in the book. Like they don't talk
Mm-hmm.
about war. Like you're not like on the front lines of war, but then it's more so like how that war affects you. Like war is kind of like a shadow over everything you do, but it's not like prevalent in all of your actions. And I think like growing up during war or during that time was probably like that.
And like not to be existential, but I feel like that's such a privilege that like when I'm reading, I'm like, I thought there'd be like war in this, right? Like I thought that it would play a much bigger role in this book. But you're talking about like it's the shadow of everything, and also like just thinking like we're so lucky because when you think about it, there's like war happening every day. We're just lucky enough to be in a place like the US where we're in a place of privilege where we're not that heavily impacted. But I'm thinking of like elections when like people are like celebrating and then they're like, well, there's a lot happening, not being able to.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, okay. Let's answer some questions.
I think that's so complicated because she just couldn't have. Like, she would have chosen him. Well, I guess, like, she could have decided to just, like, be his mistress on the side, but, like, he was never going to leave the other woman, like, his actual wife.
I think it would have been, like, a lot more painless because, like, she wouldn't have to, like, physically painless. Like, she wouldn't have to suffer from, like, having to work, having to, like, leave her mom, and then, like, having to, like, beg for food or money or whatever. Like, she wouldn't have to worry about, like, the bare necessities. But then I think, like, for her mentally and emotionally, I don't know, like, how that would go down. And I think, like, yeah, the whole story would be very, very different. But then, yeah, like Tiffany said, like, she wouldn't be his actual wife or anything. She would just be a mistress on the
Yeah.
side.
And I feel like because of her refusal of him, she got to see a kinder side. Like she kind of held his interest for a longer period of time because of that. Whereas like we see his like awful side to the people that he is like
the regular mistresses.
Yeah. And I don't think that like I think that eventually that could have been her life too.
Yeah. I think eventually, like you said, she would have been just like thrown aside. But then initially, she probably would have been fine, and
Yeah.
then after, who knows?
I also think it'd been interesting to know if like if the other mistresses like had children, because I think the difference here was like his other two like Japanese children were like girls, and then Noah was a boy.
True.
And also, I just think it's really like you said, like she kept his interest longer for this. That's why he like went out of the way to even get Yangjin from Korea to Japan, even though that's like really difficult. And even going out of the way to find Yosef's body in Nagasaki when it was like really bad there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's answer this one because it's kind of related.
I think if he grew up not having that, if he grew up knowing his father was like Yakuza, he probably wouldn't have that model minority like idea ingrained in him that he's so like adamantly rejecting.
Yeah, and also I feel like he would have grown up a lot harsher, like sharper edge, because I think like his personality already, like without his upbringing, is like already like really kind of restrictive because he's like he follows the rules, he just does everything like by the book, and he's like introverted to himself. So I feel like if he were growing up with Hansu and seeing his dad as an example of like his life, then I think he might have just like ended up like Hansu, where maybe he would eventually have like mistresses and then abuse them or like abuse his power in some sort of way. But then because his father was Isak, he like learned to be compassionate. But then also because of that compassion, it's like the whole model minority thing.
Someone asked who are your favorite characters. I feel like we didn't get the chance to talk about Masazu that much, but I really liked his character, and I think one of the two biggest parts that like made me really sad were first like when Noah committed suicide, but the second one was when Yumi died in the car accident. Because I don't know, I think their relationship was one of the ones that wasn't so like toxic in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Mozazu is definitely one of my favorites just because he feels so like light and happy and like joyful. And then I really, really like Kyung-hee but then she also makes me really sad because
she was such a good person.
Right? She was like
she did so much.
Yeah. And then like I get kind of sad because like she stayed committed to was his name Yosef?
Yosef.
Okay, yeah. She stayed committed to Yosef even though like towards the end she could have gone with that other guy that she did like, and then also Yosef was like slowly being terrible to her because of his circumstances. And then also I'm sad because like she wasn't able to like get a kid because that's like what she always wanted. She always like wanted children, but she was like never able to get pregnant or like have a kid. So it's like sad. Oh yeah. Yumi.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He never got to see America. That just made me feel sad.
Like get the whole thing with Solomon and him studying at Columbia and like I don't know, like tragic love stories everywhere. Like him loving Hannah, but then Phoebe being there.
Yeah. It sucks. But then also like Yumi and her relationship with America kind of made me sad because like I think if she were to actually come to America, she would realize, like, especially during that time, like, racism everywhere. So it would not be like the movies that she imagined. So maybe it's better that it just remained like a dream. But it's just sad.
Great. I think Sunja, like I know that it's kind of a basic answer, but I just love how she survived through it all, you know? Like I just found like that so like I saw a lot of the women in my family in her. And so I just really liked her as a character. Like I just loved following her. She doesn't always make the best decisions, and she frustrated me a lot in the book. But yeah, I love her.
I think when you said like you see a lot of your family in her, it's definitely like a relatable answer. Like we see so much of our family like making these decisions and making these sacrifices to just do what's best for like the children.
Mhm.
I don't know. Reading this book made me slightly existential.
I agree. This is like kind of what started a lot of like my just sort of like understanding of like my own history, and like just really started a lot of like sort of what you're saying, like existential like thought around like history and like just how it impacts you and the people around you and all of that.
Yeah, yeah, same. I think I read this. This was like one of the very first like Asian American author stories that I read, and it was like after this, it started the like flow of more Asian American books for at least for me, like the motivation to like learn more and to understand more.
I'm really excited for the adaptation. I'm so excited now.
Yeah.
Excited to watch Lee Min Ho.
Break your
Oh,
heart.
excited to watch it. Excited to just be like, I'm so conflicted. This is Boys Over Flowers 2.0, but so much more deep.
Yeah, yeah.
He can do mean like no other.
Yeah, for real. Like, I think I didn't even like know who he was casted as until like much later. But like when I first saw the casting, I was like, oh, he's definitely Hansu. Like, there's no other character he can play.
Yes. We'd love to see it.
Yes.
I'm also very curious because I'm thinking of when he would speak English in Airs, and it was just so like he tried really hard to like have English, and then like Lee Min Ho has like a stereotypical like token white friend. It was just kind of cringy. So I'm curious to see how like that's gonna play out when they have like an entire cast speaking both like English and Korean and Japanese.
Mhm.
It's gonna be a really ambitious, I feel like, adaptation. And I feel like it already seems like they're doing it right. So if like they continue on this path, I'm just so excited. Like, and I feel like it'll be like unlike any sort of big American made thing ever, right? Like
okay, so for those who don't know, the adaptation is I think by Apple TV, Apple TV Plus, and so far I think the only cast that I know is that Lee Min Ho is going to play Hansu, and I think right now it's in production, so I don't know when it's coming out.
They've announced other cast members. We just don't know them because we only watch Korean dramas.
Yeah, it's real.
Yeah. I think they announced. Hold up. Yeah, they announced like.
It's gonna be wild that like other people are gonna know who Lee Min Ho is. Like, I'm so excited for him.
I'm so excited for him. Yeah. I recently rewatched Boys Over Flowers because the OST is like so good.
The OG.
Yeah, it really is the OG. I think that was the first K-drama I like ever watched. And then I tried to watch him in like City Hunter and Airs, and those were like his hair was better, but it was just like not as good as Boys Over Flowers.
Hair improved, everything else no.
It was the first Korean drama that I watched like in its entirety, and where I wasn't like, because like before that it was always like weird super dramatic ones that my mom would watch on like VHS, and I'd be like, what are you watching? Why is everyone yelling?
That's like the gateway for like our generation of like yeah.
Exciting.
But I'm very glad that it's going to be like a TV series and not a movie, because there's just way too much going on.
Too much.
For sure. There's no way it could be a movie. I'm surprised for Apple TV because like I've only watched Dickinson, which is produced by Apple TV. That was pretty good, but I haven't finished it. But then I haven't watched anything else, so
there's just too many streaming
there
things
are
to keep track of.
But I will say that like their production seems really like pristine, so I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Like they have money.
And that's like important when it comes to things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just hope they get it right. Please.
Is Min Jin Lee gonna be like part of it? Is she like a screenwriter or anything? Do you know?
I don't know. I hope so.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I feel like she wouldn't have signed off on it unless at least she knew that they were gonna like do it right, you know?
Mhm.
It was
Yeah.
just really interesting because I feel like Pachinko came out like a couple years ago, but I only recently heard of it. And I think it's probably due to the adaptation.
Yeah. I feel like it's I think Pachinko is probably Min Jin Lee's like most popular book. After reading Pachinko, I got Free Food for Millionaires, and I didn't realize how big it is because like I read Pachinko on audiobook and I was like, "Oh yeah, I know this is long," because in context it is like a thick novel even if
It's like 500 pages ish.
yeah, it's like 500 pages, but you're not like, "Oh, it's not like 700, 800." It's like, "Okay," because I've read like 500 pages books, and you're like, "Oh, it's okay." But then like it feels big. But then Free Food for Millionaires is like huge.
Really?
Really?
Oh, yeah, let me go get it.
How many pages is it? Well, okay, I think like the part of the reason why Pachinko just feels so long is because we follow so many generations of people. And
Yeah.
I said this before, I feel like I aged while reading it.
Yeah, I agree. Especially because like
Oh my god.
just a lot of sadness. Oh, that is big.
Okay. It's a hardcover. This thick. There's 600
It
and
looks like a Cassandra Clare book. I feel like you could take someone out with that.
right? 660 pages.
Is the print really big though? Because sometimes Book of the Month does like larger print, I feel like.
It's not as small as like I think typical fiction or contemporary fiction, but then it's not like I think it's like probably around the size of like YA type.
Okay. It's
But
wild to me when like a fiction novel in hardback comes out and it's like this big and like it's huge, and then somehow the paperback comes out and they're always like tiny. I'm like, oh.
Like, what are these Bible pages?
I know.
oh, oh yeah.
Yeah, part 3 felt really fast.
Mhm. Yeah, part 3 was kind of like I feel like part 3 was so much because we are introduced by so many characters, and I feel like so much happens. Like
So much. Well, like Noah, like, because I just read this like recently. Like part 3 starts off with Noah leaving his family, so it's
oh,
like really jam packed.
I
Yeah.
didn't realize that. Like I
So you get
thought
to,
oh,
yeah,
continue.
like you get to see like Noah leaving his family, Sunja like looking for him, her reconciling with like Hansu trying to look for him, Noah having his own family, Mozazu having his own family. You get to learn about like Solomon and his like love fiasco. So it's like definitely jam packed in comparison to like book 1, where it's just like everything happened. Like Sanja, like Yeonjun's born, she gets married, Sunja's born, and like she gets pregnant. And then book 2, just like Sunja raising her family with like Hyunhee and Yosef and Isa.
Yeah. I feel like the book either, because like for me, like the sort of 2/3 was definitely stronger and like what I loved most. Like I can't decide if I think like she either needed to like maybe lighten it a little bit more or make it longer. But I feel like it's already like kind of intimidatingly long for some people, and so I don't like I feel like it'd be hard to expand it even further than she did.
I was just really confused when it took me like a couple tries with the audiobook to get into it, because I was just like a fisherman and like something boarding house. And then I thought Yeonjun was going to be the main character for a long time. And then it was like Sunja. I was like, okay, like, I want to go back to Yeonjun. But then I realized like Sunja was the main character.
They really start you off with heartbreak.
Yeah.
Oh, you like this man? You think he's kind and wholesome? Well, haha.
Jokes.
Yeah.
It's really sad. I do think though, like if they were to make edits on the book, it would be better longer. But
Like part 3 stretched out more.
yeah, like part 3 stretched out, so then you can kind of like understand and get to know the characters. Because I feel like when like Phoebe and Hannah and all of like Solomon and is it only Solomon? Like in grandkids? Is it just See, there's so many
That's all I
characters.
I
remember.
know. I'm blanking too. I think that's also part of it is that because you start with like one, and then like each as they add more and more people to the family, it just like gets crazier and crazier and like bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And so part of me feels like maybe that was kind of the point is like to have it feel just like that pressure of having so many people. And the way that like that very early sort of like those very early choices affected just everybody.
Yeah.
I had to look up what a cleft lip is because I did not know.
Oh yeah.
But I think it also talks to the whole like oh my God, there's so much you could talk about with this book. But like it talks about like the whole stigmatization, like this like negative what's the word stigmatization? Stigma against like disability and like things that are different. And I think what's his name? Like Haruki, the police guy in Tokyo, like he was also like him, and I think his family also had something going on too, where they were ostracized by the community. So you're not just ostracized like in Japan for being Korean, you're ostracized if you're like not normal.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. Wait.
Yeah.
Solomon knows twin daughters.
Yeah. They were not relevant, unfortunately.
Yeah. That happened when Noah was like, I'm not Korean.
I would be super fascinated. Like, I doubt she would ever do this, but if she were to ever write like a spin-off or continuation that's like modern day, and looking at like a descendant of like one of the people or something like that, because I just think that would be really fascinating.
Oh my God, that'd be so good.
Yeah, like Solomon, for example, is like a family member now. Like he left Phoebe in the end of the book. So like where is he now? Like in South Korea? Is he like or is he like in the US growing up as like a Korean American?
Yeah.
Oh, and also the ending is like so open-ended. But it like reflects real life because like real life is like that. But then like because it's so open-ended, I'm like, I need to know. I want to know what happens to them.
When I was waiting for, I don't know why, when I was reading, I was waiting for like a very big, like something big to happen at the ending, but it was just like mellowed out. So I was very surprised, but it makes sense. I don't know why I was anticipating something big.
Yeah. It's very bittersweet.
Yeah.
But that's like a lot of, like, that's life for a lot of people too.
Yeah. And I think that also reflects life because like a lot of like big things that happen, you cannot anticipate it. Like you can't be like, oh, I'm gonna mentally prepare myself for this, and this is gonna be the ending of my life or something. But like for example, Noah's suicide, and then Phoebe, no,
Hannah?
no, wait,
what are you talking about?
who is who is Solomon's mom?
Oh, the one that starts with the E?
Etsuko.
Yeah.
Yeah. Etsuko's dead, right?
You lost me, Sam.
Wait.
I don't know who you're talking about. Oh, Yumi?
Oh yeah, Yumi. Okay, hold on. Yumi's dead. Those were, I feel like those are two like shocking plot twisty moments, but then it's like it doesn't technically make sense in terms of like novel parallel, but then it makes sense if you're talking about like real life because it just happens.
Yeah, like I had like a cousin whose like father was like in a car accident. Like you don't think about these things. This is when I like when I grew up I was very like never go outside. There's so much danger in the outdoors.
Oh yeah. That was the worst. Oh, yeah. This
Well,
was,
didn't she just die? Like
yeah, she just died, but then like she put like a lot of emotional turmoil toward Sunja because she basically blamed Sunja for Noah's death.
oh yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how I feel about that.
She just felt like it was just really interesting to see how she like her growing up and then afterwards she just really felt like Asian grandma vibes.
Mm-hmm.
Like major Asian grandma vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw a lot of that.
Like cares for the kids, like cares really deeply, but at the same time can be very scolding and like it comes from a place of love, but like also very harsh.
Yeah. Especially at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Were you satisfied with what happened to Solomon in the end?
I wouldn't say satisfied.
I think oh,
you go first.
You go.
You go first.
Okay. I think it's ironic and really fitting that it all comes down to Pachinko because like Pachinko is something that is like looked down on, but then like ultimately they all go back to it. Like I can't remember any of these characters' names, but
WYG.
Mazazu for sure. Mazazu for sure like goes to Pachinko, and then that's like at first I think he was the first person who to go into Pachinko, and you're like, oh, that makes sense because like he dropped out of school, he like was like a rough kid or whatever, and then like Pachinko was like this great thing, and then for Noah, he dropped out of school, and then he eventually also went back to Pachinko, and it was like this horrible thing for him, and then for Solomon, he was like he went to work, and then like
he like was an investment banker or something like that.
Yeah, and he had this
Got fired.
horrible experience with his boss and everything, and then ultimately he was like, I'm gonna go back to what you're doing, Dad, which is Pachinko. And then it's like I feel like it's a metaphor in a way for like what Pachinko represents, which is like I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I think
I like still didn't really understand like I still like didn't really understand Pachinko, which is like bad. But I was like looking at her interviews and she was talking about how like Pachinko in Japan right now is like a $203 billion industry. So I didn't realize it was that big.
Everywhere.
Dang.
Like you'll see Pachinko parlors just like everywhere.
Well, when you say like Pachinko parlors, is it like just the game Pachinko or is it like arcades? Because when I think of like when you say like arcades with like claw machines and like other things, like I can totally imagine that, but I didn't expect like Pachinko itself to be so big.
It's like actual Pachinko. So there's the arcades, but they're very different than like a Pachinko place. And then Pachinko will sometimes be in the actual arcades. But like you could definitely, if like a place is a Pachinko parlor, you could definitely tell the difference between one and the other. And like we even went to like a pretty rural, like it's actually the town that Your Name was based on. So it was like middle of nowhere Japan, and they still had Pachinko parlors, which I thought was fascinating. But yeah, like you're saying, like it's huge, and it's like a specifically Korean thing. And
it's so prevalent in Japan.
Mm-hmm, that like couldn't be killed off, and like it was sort of like this refusal to assimilate into that specific part of like Japanese culture, like being part of that sort of like corporate world that is so integral in Japan. And then also not allowing, I feel like he's like the first character that doesn't like refuse an opportunity because of pride in a way. Like he sort of like does a thing that maybe like you're not supposed to be taking pride in doing, but chooses it because it's the path that like feels right for him.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's more of like an acceptance of like returning to family roots?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I see that. I never played Pachinko though. That was my regret when I went to Japan. I wish I had like played it once, but I hate gambling. Like it gives me so much anxiety.
Like, oh, so I don't understand. Like, is it really gambling? Because when I think of pachinko, the way it's described, it just feels like a pinball machine.
Couldn't tell you because I never played it. I just saw like.
I imagine Pachinko. I don't know. I had to look it up, but then I imagine Pachinko to be like slot machines because like slot machines, like you don't really have to do much. You just like pull the lever, or, like push the button, and I feel like Pachinko is the same, where it's like ultimately based on the machine versus like a gambling game like blackjack or something else. So I think of it something similar to like roulette or like slot machines.
That makes sense. Okay. We're like past the 1 hour mark.
Oh, wow.
So this went by really fast. This was like a really interesting, I feel like there was so much we talked about, but there's so much like we still could talk about too.
Yeah. Because there's so much history and like stuff that overlaps and
Yeah.
so many characters.
Yeah.
Part of me is glad that I read this book like now though, when I have the emotional and like mental bandwidth, because I feel like if I read this a few years ago, I was genuinely not smart enough to like understand what this book is about.
Yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah. I'm glad I reread it. I want to reread it again.
I'll probably reread it like right before the show comes out.
Oh yeah. That's a good idea. Yeah. I'll probably do that. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our live show discussion. And next month, we're going to be reading The Burning God, which is the finale of the Poppy War trilogy. And then we'll also be having a live show discussion in early January with Rebecca Kwong for that. Exciting. But thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Monica, for joining us today. It was really
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yay. Okay. Bye.